Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved so deeply, only to see them move on without a second thought? What if the betrayal wasn't just from your partner, but from your own sister? This is my story, and it's one of love, lies, and the painful journey to reclaiming myself. I'm 32 years old, and recently, I found myself in a situation that left me questioning everything. That's why I'm turning to this community for advice and unbiased perspective on a mess involving my ex-boyfriend, my sister, and my parents. Trust me, it's just as complicated as it sounds. 5 years ago, I met Jake when I was 26. He seemed perfect, charming, funny, and so supportive. We dated for a year, and for the most part, I thought we were equally invested in the relationship. But now, with hindsight, I see the signs I chose to ignore. Jake was secretive about his phone. He would disappear for hours without explaining, brushing off my concerns by saying he was busy with work or making me feel guilty for questioning him. Everything came crashing down unexpectedly during a family barbecue my parents hosted. Emily, my younger sister, was 23 at the time. She convinced me to attend the gathering after I'd been absent from family events for a while. At the barbecue, I noticed Jake was missing, so I went looking for him. I found him in the guest room, but he wasn't alone. Emily was with him. They were together. The shock I felt is indescribable. They scrambled to justify their actions, claiming they had a profound connection, calling each other soulmates using that term to justify months of deceit. Heartbroken, I left in tears, barely managing to drive home. When I confronted my family, their reaction only deepened the wound. My parents brushed the situation off as young love and trivialized my heartbreak. Instead, they focused on Emily and Jake's new relationship. In the years that followed, I distanced myself from both of them and even my parents, channeling my energy into rebuilding my life. I focused on my career, built new friendships, and over time, found happiness again. Then, one day, I received a wedding invitation from Jake and Emily. At first, it felt like a cruel reminder of the past, and I had no intention of attending. But then my parents intervened. They insisted that my absence would spark family gossip and reflect poorly on everyone involved. They pressured me calls, texts, unannounced visits, all trying to convince me to attend. With the wedding approaching, I'm torn. On one hand, I want to maintain my dignity. On the other, my family's pressure to appear supportive feels overwhelming, and I'm afraid of the scandal if I don't comply. So, I'm asking for advice from this community on how to handle this situation. Should I let go of my grievances and take the higher road, or stand firm in my convictions? During a heart-to-heart, my mom explained that while they weren't asking me to forgive them, they hoped I would rise above the situation. She emphasized that maintaining family ties was more important than clinging to resentment. Her words stayed with me. Despite the strained communication with my parents, I wasn't ready to sever ties completely. I realized moving forward meant showing them that I had healed and not dwelling on old wounds. So, after much thought, I agreed to attend Emily's wedding. But it wasn't the closure I had expected. Soon after, Emily bombarded me with texts taunting me about her victory or how Jake had always favored her. I dismissed most of them at first, but one particular series of texts caught my attention. Emily, likely drunk, vented about the immense pressure from Jake's parents to prove their worth to secure their inheritance. She boasted that their marriage would cement their favored status in the family. This revelation shed new light on their motives. It wasn't just about love, it was about financial gain. Understanding their intentions, I viewed the wedding differently. I was no longer a score. I recognized their duplicity, but instead of reacting with spite, I sought closure, not revenge. Upon arriving at the wedding, I felt tempted to leave. The setting was beautiful, everyone seemed joyous, but it all appeared insincere to me. I found my seat and braced myself to endure the ceremony quietly. Unexpectedly, my parents approached, requesting that I give a speech, arguing it would mean a lot to Emily. Despite the humiliating prospect, my mother's persistence and my father's stern tone quickly wore me down. I reluctantly agreed, knowing they wanted me to preserve the family's facade. Despite my discomfort, as I stood at the podium, anger and hurt surged through me. Yet, as I began to speak, a sudden clarity emerged. I initiated my speech with reflections on love's unpredictable nature and the fundamental need for honesty and trust in relationships. Then, I shared my personal ordeal, detailing my past with Jake and the heartbreak from his betrayal with Emily. I didn't just recount my pain. I emphasized how the experience, while devastating, instilled in me lessons of resilience and self-worth. I had a heartfelt conversation with Jake's parents, expressing my gratitude for their warmth and support during the time I spent with Jake. I highlighted my appreciation and hoped they understood the complete reality of the decisions Jake and Emily had chosen to make. Throughout our talk, I maintained a calm and steady tone, allowing the facts to resonate on their own. After I concluded, the room fell into a profound silence, and I could see the visible shock on Jake's parents' faces. They looked visibly upset and left abruptly. I could tell my words had made an impact. The rest of the wedding day turned into a whirlwind. Emily confronted me, visibly upset, accusing me of spoiling her special day. Despite Jake's attempts to calm her, Emily's frustration only grew. My own parents were embarrassed by the spectacle, but I stood by my words, feeling a long-awaited sense of closure after speaking my truth. Later, I learned from someone we both knew that Jake's parents were considering serious consequences for him, including possibly disinheriting him due to his actions, which they viewed as dishonorable. It seemed that Emily and Jake's seemingly perfect future was at risk, and they blamed me for their predicament. Emily sent a barrage of messages labeling me as selfish and spiteful. I chose not to respond, confident in my decision to reveal the truth, regardless of the fallout. It's been a week since then, and Emily's relentless messages continue, calling me a terrible person. It's starting to wear on me, making me question my actions at my sister's wedding. The attention this situation has received online has been overwhelming, and I'm grateful for the different perspectives people have offered. I need to clarify that attending the wedding wasn't an easy choice. I went not to stir up trouble, but to seek closure, and to show my family that I'm not the vindictive person they perceived me to be. Yet, I can't deny that part of me wanted to make a statement. I felt deeply humiliated and betrayed by Jake and Emily, two people I once trusted profoundly. In hindsight, my speech may have been driven by these emotions, aiming to ensure they felt the repercussions of their actions. I have no regrets about speaking out during such a painful time. No one came to my defense, and Jake and Emily's actions were largely brushed aside by our families. Even though Jake's parents were kind during our relationship, they never intervened. So I don't regret telling my side of the story. After the wedding, the immediate aftermath was intense. Jake's parents were outraged, which honestly took me by surprise. They had always presented themselves as a dignified, upstanding family. When they found out the full details of Jake and Emily's relationship, it was a shock to everyone. Jake's mother, in particular, felt deeply betrayed and furious. She couldn't believe that Jake had misled her about when he and Emily had become involved. The idea of leaving their inheritance to Emily, whom they saw as lacking both morals and integrity, was unimaginable. The lies Jake had told, and the shame they caused the family, led to his parents severing all financial support to both him and Emily. A few weeks later, I learned from a mutual friend about their financial troubles. Jake and Emily had been cut off from his family's money and were struggling to maintain the lavish lifestyle they had planned. Their extravagant wedding had been bankrolled by the inheritance they expected to receive. Without that safety net, they were in panic mode. Emily, especially, was in turmoil. She had always envisioned a life of comfort, and now she had to deal with mounting debts. Initially, Emily's messages to me were full of fury and blame. She accused me of ruining their future, saying I had turned Jake's parents against them. She called me selfish and vindictive, blaming me for destroying her happiness out of spite. But then, her tone shifted. Emily started demanding that I apologize publicly to Jake's parents, claiming I had exaggerated their story during my speech. She even suggested that I should beg them to reconsider cutting them off. It was absurd. After everything they'd done to me, she wanted me to clean up their mess. The nerve. It was almost comical. Her audacity was bewildering. I firmly refused. I made it clear that I wasn't responsible for their actions or their consequences. If Jake's parents decided to cut them off, it was because of their own lies and betrayal, not anything I had said. Their relationship had been built on deceit, and now they were facing the fallout. I had no obligation to fix it. I stopped responding to Emily's messages and blocked her. For years, I carried the burden of their actions, but now I felt free of it. Their problems were theirs, and I had no interest in being involved. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. A week has passed since I blocked Emily, and the relief is overwhelming. No one else has reached out to me about it, and I hope I'm not tempting fate by even mentioning it. I have more important things to focus on than this petty drama. I'm determined to stay out of it, but if anything changes, I'll update you. For now, goodbye. Well, I might have spoken too soon in my last update, a classic mistake. A few weeks have passed, and much has happened that prompted another update. After blocking Emily and thinking I had left all the drama behind, my family brought it up again. Barely over a week since I had ignored Emily's persistent demands, my parents intervened, insisting we resolve our issues. They believed my actions had unnecessarily widened the rift within our family, and now it was my responsibility to mend it. They were particularly concerned about Emily and Jake's hardships, pinning some of the blame on me. The tension escalated until I felt compelled to confront the situation head-on. We arranged to meet at our neighborhood cafe to discuss everything. During this meeting, my parents depicted me as spiteful and vindictive, accusing me of clinging to old grudges. They criticized my speech at the wedding, labeling it inappropriate and hurtful. They emphasized the need for me to act maturely and reminded me that family should always come first, implying that Emily, despite everything, was still my sister. They weren't just upset about the impact on Emily and Jake. They felt I had shamed our entire family. They urged me to apologize to Jake's parents, hoping it might ease the tension between Emily and Jake. Although their stance was predictable, it was still painful to hear. They overlooked everything Emily and Jake had done to me, suggesting I should forgive and forget, as if time could heal all wounds. My pain and betrayal went unrecognized. Instead, they focused solely on how my actions had affected Emily, her future, her happiness, and her relationship. Feeling sidelined and invalidated once more, I knew I had to assert myself. I refused to apologize for speaking the truth at the wedding. I pointed out that Emily and Jake's relationship had started on a foundation of betrayal, and if they were now facing consequences, that was not my fault. I highlighted the lack of accountability for Emily's actions and the unfair expectations placed on me to always be the peacemaker. As my parents attempted to placate the situation by saying Emily, Jake, and I were just young and these things happen, I reached my limit. Overwhelmed by frustration, I abruptly left the cafe and even turned off my phone to silence any further attempts to sway me. But despite my firm stance, a part of me felt guilty. Your supportive messages have reassured me that I wasn't in the wrong, and I'm trying hard not to let guilt manipulate my decisions. Yet, the echoes of my parents' words lingered, making me question if I was being too harsh. Despite everything, the doubt crept in, challenging the clarity I thought I had about the situation. After my impactful wedding speech, I started to ponder whether it had truly led to Jake being disinherited, or if there were deeper issues at play that I wasn't aware of. Driven by a mix of curiosity and remorse, I decided it was time to hear Jake's parents' perspective directly. To my surprise, they were quite forthcoming when I reached out. They revealed that their issues with Jake had started well before the wedding. My speech had merely crystallized their long-standing concerns. They shared that Jake had often misrepresented his professional successes and financial independence, relying heavily on their financial support instead. Their suspicions about his honesty had been building up, but they hesitated to confront him without concrete evidence. My words at the wedding had been the final straw, confirming their doubts about his integrity and manipulative behavior. Jake's parents were particularly disappointed by the way Jake and Emily's relationship had begun, viewing it as a serious breach of trust. They emphasized that their decision to cut ties was not a sudden one spurred by my speech, but the result of years of disappointment and accumulated evidence of Jake's behavior. They even expressed gratitude towards me for my honesty at the wedding. Knowing that they understood and appreciated my perspective was immensely relieving. It helped me realize that the tension between Jake and Emily was rooted in their choices, not my actions. This conversation was a turning point for me, It alleviated the guilt I had carried for years and helped me understand that standing up for my truth was not wrong. It had actually helped Jake's parents see things more clearly, prompting them to take necessary actions they had previously avoided. My family, however, continued to urge me to mend things with Emily, but I've learned to distance myself from their views. I'm focusing on myself now, prioritizing my well-being and moving forward without guilt. I've even decided to minimize contact with my family for a while as I navigate this new phase of my life. I'm committed to not letting the situation weigh me down any longer. I appreciate all the support and advice from everyone here. It truly means the world to me. I'll keep you updated on any new developments. Thank you for standing by me through this journey. Learning that someone you trusted is a cheater is a tough lesson, and it's one that will stick with me forever. It's been 4 months since I last shared anything, and during 3 of those months, life was surprisingly peaceful. Emily and my parents had stopped trying to get me involved in the drama between Emily and Jake, accepting that I was done being the mediator. For the first time in a long while, I found peace. I wasn't plagued by guilt or anger, and I was finally able to focus on my own well-being and happiness. However, tranquility never seems to last. At the beginning of this month, I got a message from an unknown number. It didn't take me long to realize it was Emily. She cut to the chase and told me she had annulled her marriage to Jake, saying she couldn't handle it anymore and thought I should know. I chose not to reply. I had made it clear before that I didn't want her back in my life, and I had no intention of reopening that door. Yet, Emily wasn't finished. Over the next 5 days, she sent a flurry of messages, gradually unfolding the reasons behind her drastic decision. Emily told me about the severe financial hardships they faced after Jake lost his financial support from his parents. Struggling to adapt to a tighter budget, Jake didn't cope well. Instead of addressing their issues, he resorted to infidelity, not just with 1 but 5 women, including 2 of Emily's bridesmaids. Although I never asked for the details, Emily seemed to know I was reading her messages, perhaps because of my read receipts. She started by explaining how she had begun noticing Jake's increasingly suspicious behavior. He was often out late, offering weak excuses for where he was, and being overly secretive with his phone. At first, Emily dismissed these signs, chalking them up to stress. But everything changed when one of the bridesmaids confessed to having an affair with Jake. This revelation set off a chain of events. When Emily confronted Jake, he initially denied it, but eventually confessed not only to the affair with the bridesmaid, but with 5 other women as well. As I read Emily's texts, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Jake had revealed his true character to her, just as he had to me years ago. It seemed like karma had finally come full circle. But for a fleeting moment, I also felt pity for Emily. I understood the deep pain of being betrayed by someone you trusted, but that pity didn't last long. After all, Emily had chosen Jake and betrayed me first. Now she was facing the consequences of those choices. The messages didn't stop with her recounting her betrayal. Emily began reaching out, asking for advice. She wanted to know how I had coped with the betrayal and managed to move on. Despite everything that had happened, she was looking for guidance on how to handle the heartbreak she now found herself in, the same heartbreak I once faced. She repeatedly asked me to support her, insisting that since we had both been wronged by the same person, we should help each other through it. Yet, not once did she offer an apology for her actions. There was no acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused me by sleeping with Jake. Instead, she painted us as being in the same boat, as if her suffering could somehow erase the pain she had caused me. I chose not to reply to her messages. She had already taken up more of my time and energy than she deserved. After 5 days of incessant texting, I finally decided to block her again. This time, I felt no guilt, only relief. Relief that I no longer had to engage with her and knowing that karma had caught up with her. Jake had exposed his true self to Emily, and she only had herself to blame for not seeing the obvious warning signs. As far as I was concerned, she was now experiencing the consequences of her own choices. Looking back on everything how I handled the situation at the wedding, and the months that followed, I have no regrets. Telling the truth wasn't petty. It was necessary. Jake and Emily's relationship, founded on deceit and betrayal, was always destined to collapse. I had wasted too much time trying to please people who didn't deserve my kindness. Now, I'm done with that. For the first time in a long time, I'm focusing on my own happiness and well-being, and it feels incredible. I've realized that sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is simply walk away and let karma do its job. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm ready to move forward and leave all of this behind. Yes, it's unfortunate that I've lost contact with my family because of everything that's happened, but I've been thinking it might be time to seek therapy. I need to address the emotions I've been ignoring for so long, and I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who reached out or sent private messages of support. Your kindness has made navigating this tough situation just a little bit easier. Did I do the right thing by confronting this betrayal? Or was I too harsh on my family and sister? After discovering that Jake and my sister Emily betrayed me, I chose to speak the truth instead of staying silent. Although it was painful and my family opposed me, I spoke up at their wedding, expressing my hurt and revealing the reality of their relationship. Despite trying to gain acceptance from my family, I realized that I needed to stand firm and not let them continue to belittle me. From the perspective of self-respect, it's clear that I chose to stand up for myself. The betrayal by Emily and Jake was not just an emotional wound, but also a betrayal of trust. I had to face the harsh reality that my family didn't protect me, but rather prioritized pleasing others. My parents' words showed they didn't understand the importance of honesty in relationships. They wanted me to forgive and forget, as if time could heal everything, but I realized that I couldn't continue forgiving them without recognizing my own pain. Was I too harsh for refusing to forgive and speak the truth? Or should my family have recognized my hurt and supported me instead of focusing solely on Emily's happiness and the family image? What do you think about this situation? Would you have stood up for yourself like I did? Or would you have kept silent to avoid family conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.
Just the other day, I had my wedding with the man I love. The person who became my husband is Dylan. We dated for 3 years. We work in different departments at the same company, and met through a mutual friend 3.5 years ago. We started as friends for 6 months before starting a romantic relationship. After 3 years of dating, he proposed to me. Of course, I had always wanted to marry someone I love, so when Dylan proposed to me, I was overjoyed to the point of tears. Dylan is different from me, who is indecisive. He has his own thoughts. Although he doesn't talk much, he calmly judges things and assesses situations properly. I tend to be indecisive and act on impulse, so he serves as a partner who can hold me back and make me think. Many people attended our wedding, including our families, relatives, friends, and colleagues. We were blessed by a large number of people and had a happy wedding. I felt so happy that I wished time would stop right there, and I was filled with joy knowing that I could be with Dylan forever. Even after getting married, we both continue working as before. My husband Dylan is busy with his job in the sales department, and there are times when he comes home close to midnight. On the other hand, I mainly do office work, so I can often leave at regular hours. It became a daily routine for me to come home early, prepare dinner, and wait for Dylan to come home. One day, we were having a relaxing breakfast on a day off. Once we settled down a bit more, I want to have children, I said. Yeah, you're right. We should also think about getting our own home, Dylan replied. We had such conversations while facing each other and enjoying a delicious breakfast. These simple everyday moments were incredibly happy for me. I didn't suspect what would happen later, and I didn't even imagine it. After we finished breakfast, when Dylan was doing the dishes, which he usually left to me on weekdays, his phone rang on the table. Your phone's ringing, I said. I'll call back later, it's fine, he replied. He said that, so I didn't pay much attention to it. However, just as I thought the call ended, the phone rang again immediately. The phone is ringing again, I noted. I looked at the screen. It showed the name of Dylan's mother. Hey Dylan, it's your mother on the phone, I told him. He let out a deep sigh and took the call. Hello? I could faintly hear his mother's voice through the phone. Wondering what it could be about, I decided to stay quiet until the call ended. However, from time to time my husband sounded troubled. "It's difficult when you spring a name like this. We already have Sage, you know," he said. He seemed to be having some kind of disagreement with his mother. Sage is Dylan's younger sister and could be considered my sister-in-law. To be honest, I wasn't fond of both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. It happened when it had been 2 years since I started dating Dylan, and we went to visit his family. Dylan's father had already passed away, and Dylan had been living alone since he started working. At his family home, his mother and sister lived together. When we visited the family home, both his mother and sister warmly welcomed me at first. I felt slightly relieved as I had been extremely nervous before, and we spent time together engaging in casual conversations as the four of us. However, when Dylan excused himself saying, "I'll go to the restroom for a moment," and left the table, something changed instantly in the expressions of the two people who had been kind and friendly to me until then. Sensing it immediately, I became awkward all of a sudden. While waiting for Dylan to return, Sage laughed at me and said, "With your tacky clothes and noisy makeup, is my brother not embarrassed to marry someone like you, huh?" My sister-in-law sneered at me. In my confusion from the sudden turn of events, Dylan's mother added, "She's right, isn't she? What's good about you? Since you claim to be in a serious relationship, I expected more from you." Even my mother-in-law belittled me. I couldn't come up with a clever response, and all I could do was hold back tears. Sage continued laughing loudly. "Oh, what's this? Are you about to cry? Both my mom and I were only stating the truth, you know." While laughing, my sister-in-law said that. Dylan's mother approached me as if trying to comfort me with words that brought no comfort whatsoever. "You got hurt because we spoke the truth, didn't you? Sage, it's okay for you since you're cute. There are people who struggle with being unattractive. You shouldn't say such things too often, you know." My mother-in-law-to-be sneered. She pretended to offer some kind of follow-up that didn't provide any comfort. I had reached my limit and couldn't bear it any longer. Just then, I heard the sound of the toilet flushing, and it seemed Dylan sensed something, because the verbal abuse from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law abruptly ceased. "Shall we head home soon?" I asked. With those words, we were able to leave his parents' house right away. While in the car, Dylan asked, "Is something wrong?" No, nothing's wrong," I replied in a hurry. It wasn't that I chose not to say anything, I simply couldn't. The shock of not being accepted by the family of someone I loved brought an overwhelming feeling and frustration with no outlet. If I were to tell Dylan, it would all come pouring out. However, it seemed that he found my behavior strange. He pulled over the car. "Jimena, please tell me what's going on. I'm seriously considering a future with you, Jimena." Looking into my eyes, he said those words earnestly. His sincerity overwhelmed me, and the tears I had been holding back began to flow. "Actually," I said, and proceeded to tell him everything that had happened while he was away at his parents' house. Dylan listened to my story without interruption. "I'm so sorry. It's my fault. If we get married, let's cut ties with my family," he said. Since then, Dylan never mentioned his family, and he never took me to visit them. Apart from that moment at our wedding, I hadn't seen his mother or sister. I thought this kind of relationship would continue in the future. Just then, my husband received a call from his mother. After a phone call that lasted about 10 minutes, my husband hung up. His expression wasn't cheerful, and I sensed that it wasn't good news. "Dylan, are you okay?" I asked. "My mom suggested that she wants to live with us," he responded. "Huh?" My mind went blank. His mother, who seemed to dislike me so much, proposing to live together. What on earth is happening? As I was thinking about that, Dylan said, "You wouldn't want to live together, right, Jimena? I don't want to see you sad." In response, I honestly replied, "Yeah, honestly, I'm scared of living together too." However, from that day on, we started receiving persistent phone calls from my mother-in-law to both my and Dylan's phones. Ignoring them didn't make a difference. The calls would keep ringing until we answered. Of course, she's my mother-in-law, so I couldn't reject the calls. Once we answered, it would go on for at least 30 minutes. I could only silently listen to her talk, and I could only tell Dylan, "I received another call today." That's all I could do. But even so, Dylan protected me from his mother's insistence and repeatedly turned down the idea of living together. However, due to the phone calls from my mother-in-law, it started affecting our work. My husband's job required him to be constantly attentive to phone calls, and having his mother's calls mixed in became a significant nuisance. Of course, even though I worked in an office job, it was tiresome to see dozens of missed calls every time I checked my phone during breaks. I couldn't let it go on like this. With that thought in mind, I proposed to Dylan that we visit his parents' house and have a proper discussion. "Are you sure about this, Jimena? You don't have to come to my parents' place if you don't want to," Dylan expressed his concern. "I'll be fine," I reassured him, and we decided to visit his parents' house on the next day off. And finally, the day arrived. As we rang the intercom at his parents' house, my mother-in-law came out from the front door. Upon seeing my face, tears welled up in her eyes. "Jimena, I'm truly sorry for what happened back then," she said, lowering her head deeply in apology. I was taken aback by this unexpected gesture, and Dylan beside me seemed equally surprised. "Please lift your head, mother-in-law," I said gently. "But it's true that I hurt you. I really wanted to apologize," she repeated, her voice choked with tears. At that moment, I asked, "Mother-in-law, why did you suddenly suggest living together?" "Sage, you know, she might get married soon and I feel anxious about living alone in this house," she said, shedding more tears. Seeing her in that state, it pained my heart as well. "Hey Dylan, let's live together." "Huh? But I'll be fine," he responded. Saying that, I made the decision to live together, trusting that my mother-in-law had truly changed. However, as expected, living together was not what I had imagined. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were kind only on the day of the move. From the next day onwards, I experienced the same oppressive days as before. As Dylan, who worked in sales, left home earlier than me, I would hang the laundry after seeing him off. That's when my mother-in-law approached me. "Your way of doing this is different from ours. Let's start over," she said, throwing all the laundry I had hung onto the ground. It wasn't just my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law joined in as well. "I can't eat this terrible food," my mother-in-law commented on the dishes I prepared, and proceeded to throw it in the trash. I endured such cruel treatment repeatedly. Whenever I tried to talk to them, both of them completely ignored me. I was treated as if I didn't exist. Even though I experienced this kind of mistreatment, I remained silent and endured. After all, it was my own decision to live together despite Dylan's concerns. If I had spoken up, perhaps something would have changed, but I was so busy with work, coming home exhausted every day, that I couldn't find the opportunity to talk to Dylan. On one particular holiday, my sister-in-law revealed her true colors even in front of my husband. "I'm getting married, but please don't come to the wedding, sister-in-law," she said bluntly. Dylan immediately responded, "Hey, what are you saying? Jimena is your sister-in-law, isn't she?" He got angry and defended me. However, my sister-in-law laughed triumphantly. "I told my fiancé you were our housekeeper. It would be embarrassing if the housekeeper attended the wedding, right? Plus, you're ugly, sister-in-law. I don't want people to think we're related," she said with a sneer. In that moment, I felt a boiling anger rising within me. I had endured silently until now, but even when my husband scolded her, she maintained this attitude. These people really have no intention of changing their behavior, I thought. That's when I became convinced. To make matters worse, even my mother-in-law joined in. "Well, yes, it would be undesirable for someone like Jimena to be considered a part of our family. Let's have her stay home and take care of things," she smiled warmly. "Cut it out. Apologize to Jimena," Dylan demanded, anger in his voice. They completely ignored him. In response to Dylan's frustration, I said, "It's okay, Dylan, I won't attend." "But," Dylan tried to object, "it's really fine. The bride is the main focus of the wedding, right? It wouldn't be good for me to attend and disrupt the atmosphere," I said, calming Dylan's anger. Of course, that wasn't how I truly felt. But I didn't want to participate in the first place. So when my sister-in-law suggested my non-participation, I actually thought it was a stroke of luck. In reality, if my sister-in-law got married and moved out, it would reduce half of my stress. Considering that, I thought it wasn't a big deal to miss the wedding. My sister-in-law planned to register her marriage the day after the wedding. She intended to stay near the venue with her fiancé on the night before the wedding, so it would be an evening with my mother-in-law Dylan and me. My mother-in-law emphasized to me, "You must not come tomorrow." "Yes, don't worry, I won't go," I replied. When I said that, she smiled with satisfaction. The next day, my husband and mother-in-law headed to the wedding, banding together. After seeing them off, I had plans of my own, so I started getting ready to leave the house. I killed time as instructed by someone at the cafe near the venue. About 2 hours into the ceremony, I received a message asking me to come to the venue. I headed to the venue as instructed and made my way to the bride's waiting room, where I had been told to go in advance. I knocked and opened the door, and there was my sister-in-law in the middle of her outfit change. My mother-in-law was also there. Upon seeing my face, my sister-in-law frowned and yelled, "Hey, why is my sister-in-law here? Didn't I tell you not to come?" she shouted angrily. My mother-in-law chimed in, "Jimena, stay put. You're out of place here. Leave immediately." Then the waiting room door swung open with force, and Sage's fiancé entered the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he said, stepping into the room. "Huh? Why?" My sister-in-law was clearly shaken. "The person you said was a housekeeper turned out to be your sister-in-law? You're disgusting," the fiancé outraged. No, it's not like that. "There's a reason for this," my sister-in-law attempted to deceive, but her fiancé responded, "It's useless to try to cover it up." He sat and took out a voice recorder. When he pressed the play button, what came out was the sound of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law verbally bullying me as they usually did. "Why do you have that?" The faces of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law grew paler and paler. However, at some point my sister-in-law seemed to realize something and glared at me intensely. "You're the one behind this, aren't you, you wicked woman?" she said, and attempted to attack me, but it was my husband who stopped her. "Huh, big brother?" My sister-in-law looked perplexed. In response, my husband said, "I recorded it and gave it to your fiancé. It was me." So actually, the night before, my husband told me before going to bed, "For tomorrow's wedding, I want you to come to the venue when I contact you. Until then, please wait nearby." That's what he said to me. Both waiting at the cafe and heading to the waiting room at the venue, all the way were under the instructions of my husband Dylan. I had no idea that Dylan had such intentions, but I was happy to realize that Dylan had taken action considering me so much. "Why would you do this?" my sister-in-law trembled and stammered. "You two have hurt someone dear to me so much. I won't forgive you. I'll sever all ties," my husband said. Following him, Sage's fiancé spoke up. "I can't marry someone as despicable as you. Let's pretend the wedding never happened," he said and left the room. "Wait!" My sister-in-law hurriedly said that and chased after him, followed by my mother-in-law chasing after her. The staff members looked puzzled, but my husband and I found it amusing and burst into laughter right there. "Well then, let's go home," my husband said and held my hand. According to my husband, he had already signed a contract for a new apartment, and he told me that we could start living there from today. We went back to my in-laws' house, packed our belongings, and headed to our new home. Since moving, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law have been constantly contacting us, but my husband said, "We've cut ties, so it's fine," and he blocked their calls. I followed suit. Since then, my husband and I have had no contact with my in-laws. According to rumors, my gentle sister-in-law has become self-destructive, taking out her frustration on my mother-in-law and leading a miserable life. In our new home, we started a new life, and after a while, we conceived a child. I am currently on maternity leave. I hope that my beloved husband, our precious unborn child, and I can live happily from now on. I never thought I would hate my mother-in-law so much, but when I saw her on the security footage, I knew there was no turning back. 8 years ago, my husband and I embarked on what I now reflect on as both a journey of transformation and a family saga. It began simply enough. We bought a house in Queensland, but it was more a house in location than in spirit. The vast backyard was nothing but an unending stretch of lawn, monotonous and utterly devoid of charm or shade. In the scorching Queensland summers, it was unbearable. "We have to change this," I said to Ezra, my husband, as we surveyed our new possession. He nodded, his eyes reflecting my thoughts. "Let's make it ours. Let's give it life." Our plan was to plant a variety of native trees, particularly eucalyptus and gum trees. We envisioned transforming the bland lawn into a vibrant bushland, a small sanctuary that whispered of the wild beauty of our country. It was an expensive venture, but we believed in the worth and future joy it would bring. The trouble began when we shared our plans with Ezra's mother, Mia. Her reaction was far from what we expected. "Native trees? They're just so ugly," she said, her voice laced with contempt. Ezra, usually calm and diplomatic, was taken aback but stood his ground. "Mom, it's our home. We're doing this." Her disapproval was a shadow over our project. Each tree we planted became a silent testament to our defiance. I remember the weight of her disdain like a physical presence, thick in the air as we worked. One evening, after yet another disapproving comment from Mia, Ezra's frustration was palpable. "She wants us to replace them with a lawn that meets her approval," he said, almost in disbelief. I was indignant. "Are you going to let her dictate what we do with our own home?" He shook his head firmly. "Never. This is our place, our decision." We thought that was the end of it, that she would eventually come to accept our decision. But as we would soon find out, Mia's disapproval was a precursor to an act that would shake the very foundations of our family relationships and force us to stand up in ways we never imagined. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Our backyard gradually transformed as we planted each sapling with care and hope. I often caught Ezra looking out the window, a satisfied smile playing on his lips as he observed the burgeoning growth of our little bushland. Despite Mia's disapproval, we felt a deep connection to the land we were nurturing. But the peace was short-lived. Mia's visits became more frequent, and with each one, her criticism grew sharper. "It looks like a jungle," she would complain. "You're ruining a perfectly good lawn." Ezra, who had always shared a close bond with his mother, found himself in an increasingly difficult position. "Mom, this is important to us," he would respond, his voice tinged with frustration. Her disapproval was a constant, unwelcome guest in our home. It hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, yet Ezra remained steadfast. "This is our home, our choice," he would remind me whenever I felt overwhelmed by the tension. One particularly heated evening, Mia called, her voice shrill over the phone. "You need to get rid of those trees. They're an eyesore." Ezra's reply was terse, a rare edge to his voice. "Mom, we're not changing anything. The trees stay." I could hear the disbelief in her voice as she spluttered her response, but Ezra ended the call with a firm finality that left no room for argument. Later, as we sat on our porch, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves of our young trees, Ezra sighed heavily. "I've never seen her this upset, but I won't let her dictate our lives." I reached out, squeezing his hand. "We're doing what's right for us. She'll have to accept it." That night we went to bed believing the worst was over. We were convinced that Mia's resistance would eventually wane, that she would come to see the beauty in our choice. Little did we know, the real storm was just on the horizon, one that would test our resolve in ways we never imagined. The morning we discovered the saplings uprooted, the world seemed to stand still. I remember stepping into the backyard, a cup of coffee in hand, and freezing in my tracks. The young trees, our labor of love, were gone. In their place were gaping holes in the earth, a violent testament to an unthinkable act. Ezra joined me, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, then to a simmering anger. "Who would do this?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and fury. We raced to check the footage from our security cameras, the sinking feeling in my stomach growing with each passing second. The screen flickered to life, revealing the last person we expected, Mia. There she was, in the harsh light of dawn, ripping out each sapling with a ferocity that belied her age. The drive to her house was tense, each mile stretching longer than the last. Ezra's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I could feel the anger radiating off him, a stark contrast to the usually composed man I knew. When we arrived, Ezra's father, Elijah, greeted us with a puzzled look. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing our distressed state. The confrontation that ensued was chaotic. Mia at first feigned ignorance, but the truth was undeniable. "Why, Mom?" Ezra's voice broke as he confronted her, the security footage playing on his phone. Her justification fell on deaf ears. "I thought I was doing what's best for you," she muttered, but her words sounded hollow even to her. Elijah's reaction was immediate and fierce. "You did what?" His voice thundered in the small living room. I had never seen him so angry. He turned to us, his expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions. Elijah, in a gesture of solidarity, stayed with us for a few weeks, helping to replant the trees. His disappointment in Mia was evident, a deep chasm that seemed to widen with each passing day. In an unexpected twist, he insisted Mia pay for new trees. She complied, albeit reluctantly. Together, we replanted our backyard, Elijah's presence a silent apology for his wife's actions. But the most surprising act of defiance came from Elijah himself. Among the new saplings was a rainbow eucalyptus, a majestic tree known for its immense size and vibrant bark. It was his way of making amends, a living symbol of his support for our vision. As we watched the new trees take root, I realized that this incident had changed our family dynamics irreversibly. Elijah's decision to stand with us marked a new chapter in our lives, one where old grievances were overshadowed by new alliances, and where our backyard, once a point of contention, became a symbol of resilience and unity. In the weeks that followed, our home became a refuge for Elijah. He spent long hours helping us nurse the garden back to health, his presence a balm to the wound Mia's actions had inflicted. Each tree planted was not just a restoration of our vision, but also a subtle mending of the fractures within the family. Mia, on the other hand, remained conspicuously absent. Her relationship with Elijah grew strained, the tension between them palpable even in her absence. It was clear that the sapling incident had unearthed deeper issues in their marriage, ones that had perhaps been simmering beneath the surface for years. For Ezra and me, the incident was a stark reminder of the importance of standing up for what we believed in. Our backyard, once a barren wasteland, was slowly transforming into the lush sanctuary we had envisioned. The new saplings thrived, and the rainbow eucalyptus in particular became a source of pride. Its vibrant bark stood out against the greenery, a symbol of defiance and resilience. Elijah's decision to stay with us turned into weeks, then months. His marriage to Mia, once a cornerstone of his life, now seemed like a vestige of the past. He filed for divorce, a decision that shocked everyone, perhaps even himself. But in our garden, among the trees that had caused so much turmoil, he found peace. The impact on our family was profound. The divorce shifted the dynamics in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Elijah's presence in our home brought a new sense of harmony, his wisdom and calmness a steady force in our lives. Mia's relationship with all of us, especially Ezra, became distant and strained. Her visits ceased entirely, and her absence was a silent testament to the consequences of her actions. As the trees grew, so did our bonds. Elijah, once merely my father-in-law, became a mentor and friend. Our conversations, often held under the shade of the growing eucalyptus, ranged from the mundane to the profound. He shared stories of his youth, his marriage, and his hopes for the future. The garden became our sanctuary, a place where the troubles of the world seemed distant and muted. It was in this newfound peace that I realized the true meaning of home. It wasn't just about the walls and the roof, it was about the life we cultivated within and around it. Our little bushland, born from a vision of beauty and existence, had become the heart of our home, a testament to the enduring power of nature and the strength of family bonds forged in adversity. The years that followed were a time of quiet healing and growth, both for our family and for our garden. Elijah, now a permanent resident in our granny flat, became an integral part of our daily lives. His divorce from Mia had been a painful yet necessary closure to a chapter that no longer served him. He often said the trees were his companions in this new phase of life, each one a testament to resilience and renewal. Mia's absence was a shadow that lingered, yet it became less oppressive over time. Ezra's relationship with her was forever altered. The bonds of filial piety were strained, and their interactions became infrequent and formal. It was a loss, but in many ways a necessary one for the health and harmony of our own family unit. Our garden, meanwhile, flourished. The rainbow eucalyptus, once a small sapling, now stood tall and proud, its trunk a vivid tapestry of colors. It was the crown jewel of our backyard, a living symbol of defiance and beauty. Visitors often marveled at it, unaware of the deep story it held within its vibrant bark. As the garden matured, so did our understanding of what it meant to stand up for what we believe in. The trees were more than just plants. They were a reflection of our values, our resilience, and our commitment to carving out our own path. Our once bland and unremarkable backyard had transformed into a lush, vibrant haven, a space that provided not just physical shade, but emotional shelter. Elijah, in his quiet way, became the guardian of our garden. He tended to the plants with a dedication that spoke of his gratitude and love. In the tranquility of the garden, he found a sense of purpose and peace that had eluded him in the later years of his marriage. And as for Mia, she remained an outsider to this world we had created. She never set foot in our backyard again, her pride and stubbornness keeping her at a distance. It was a sad yet inevitable consequence of her actions. In the end, our family story was not just about conflict and strife, but about growth and healing. It was a narrative of breaking away from toxic patterns and finding strength in unity and understanding. Our garden was a living testament to this journey, each tree a chapter in our family's story, rooted deep in the soil of our shared experiences. Years have passed since the saplings were first planted, and our garden has transformed into a lush, thriving ecosystem. The trees, once fragile and young, now stand tall and robust, their canopies providing a cool, leafy refuge from the world outside. The rainbow eucalyptus, with its colorful bark, has grown into a majestic presence, a focal point that draws the eye and soothes the soul. Elijah's presence in the granny flat has become a natural part of our lives. His involvement in our daily routines and his contributions to the garden have deepened our relationship. He often jokes that he's more a gardener than a resident, but his eyes always hold a glint of contentment when he says it. As for Mia, time has softened the sharp edges of our conflict. Ezra and I have reached a cordial understanding with her, though the intimacy of the past remains lost. She has become more a distant relative than an integral part of our family, a consequence of her actions that she seems to have accepted, albeit reluctantly. Our garden has become a symbol of our family's journey. It's a place where we've celebrated milestones, shared quiet moments of reflection, and found solace during times of sorrow. The trees, each with their own story, have been silent witnesses to the ebbs and flows of our lives. In this space, I often find myself reflecting on the lessons we've learned, the importance of standing up for what you believe in, the strength found in unity, and the resilience required to grow and adapt. Our garden, with its diverse flora, mirrors the diversity and complexity of our family's journey. As I walk among the trees, I feel a deep sense of connection to the earth and to the story we have written here. It's a narrative that speaks of healing, growth, and the enduring power of nature. The garden has taught us that even in the face of adversity, there is always an opportunity for new growth, for change, and for beauty to emerge. In many ways, our garden is a reflection of life itself, unpredictable, ever-changing, and rich with possibilities. It stands as a testament to what can be achieved when you plant the seeds of hope and nurture them with love and perseverance. As I look at the thriving greenery around me, I am reminded that in every challenge, there is a chance to grow, to flourish, and to create something truly beautiful. Wait, what's going on here? I exclaimed. After being asked for help by my mother, I hurried home from work. In front of me was a moving truck parked outside. Hey, whose stuff are they moving? I demanded. It's my parents' stuff, my husband Jimmy replied calmly. Your parents' stuff? You decided to move your parents in without consulting me or my mother? I was furious. And to top it off, you kicked my mother out of the house? I won't forgive you for this selfish act. I'll make sure you regret your insensitivity. My name is Meryl, and I'm 28 years old. I met my husband Jimmy at work, and we've been married for almost 2 years now. We live with my mother in her house, the three of us. A few years ago, my mother had an accident that left her physically disabled. She can do the minimum, but it's still worrisome to leave her alone, so we decided to live together. At first, my husband was understanding and considerate of my mother, but lately, his selfish behavior has become unbearable. Hey Jimmy, we have to go to the hospital with Mom this Saturday, I told him. Again, huh? He responded immediately, not even looking at me. Wait a minute, I haven't said anything yet, I retorted. It's probably something like, take Mom to the hospital, I don't want to ruin my day off, he interrupted. It's impossible, he continued. No, it's not that. I wanted you to take care of the house while I take Mom to the hospital, I explained. All that? But it's impossible, he insisted. Huh? Why not? I asked, getting frustrated. It's your job as a housewife to do that kind of thing, not mine. Besides, it's my day off, he said dismissively. Housewife, we both work, you know, I reminded him. When we got married, we promised to support each other, including our mothers. However, my husband never really followed through on his end of the deal. No matter how many times I asked him, eventually he started getting moody and ignoring me altogether. Despite coming home at the same time every day, he never bothered to prepare any meals. Instead, he'd say insensitive things to me, knowing full well that I was exhausted from work. Hey, I'm hungry. Is the food ready yet? Why don't you just tell your mother to make it? She's just sitting around the house all day anyway. Or we could just eat out. Either way, make sure you give me some money, he would say. I put up with this behavior for so long, I knew that I had to have a serious talk with him soon. One day, while I was making breakfast, my mother came out of her room dressed in sweat and looking uncomfortable. I rushed over to her and asked what was wrong. What happened? I asked, concerned. Oh, I'm just feeling a little hot, she replied. Well, it's 82 degrees outside, so I'm not surprised. Did you not turn on the air conditioning in your room? I asked. It doesn't have good ventilation, does it? She said hesitantly. Well, you see, Jimmy told me not to use it because it wastes electricity, she continued. Excuse me? Jimmy did what? He told you not to use the air conditioning? But it's so hot, and if we don't use it, we'll get sick, I exclaimed, shocked. I rushed to my husband's room and confronted him immediately. Hey, Jimmy, what were you thinking? I demanded. What's the matter all of a sudden? He responded, looking annoyed. What's the matter? You told Mom not to use the air conditioning. Why would you say something so cruel? I asked, my anger rising. Cruel? But we're the ones paying for the utilities in this house. It would be a waste of money to use it unnecessarily, he argued. Unnecessarily? What if Mom gets sick because of this? I countered. You're exaggerating, Meryl. Are you only thinking about your mother? What about my feelings? He snapped. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, like our future and the children we'll have. Something you never seem to think about, Meryl. You always seem to be thinking about your mom, he accused. We're not even talking about that right now. If your mom is so important to you, then maybe you should just focus on your parents, I shot back. My husband threw a cushion at me and then went to bed in a huff. What is his problem? I always keep the air conditioner on blast when I'm in the room, but I guess that's okay for me and not for others. He's being so selfish. Our house doesn't have any rent because my mother built it for us. She pays the property tax and gives us a monthly allowance, which my husband knows. Why did he say what he did? I'm not asking him to be grateful to my mother, but I wish he would at least consider her. We have to talk about this another day. I let out a sigh as I soaked in the bathtub. A few days later, as usual, I was at work when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. Mom, why are you calling me at this time? I wondered. Normally, she never called during work. Could something be wrong? I nervously answered the phone. Mom, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I asked. Help me, Meryl, my mother cried out. What? What do you mean, help? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Meryl, Jimmy brought his parents to our house and something terrible happened, she explained. Wait, Jimmy brought his parents here? I repeated, trying to comprehend the situation. Then I heard my husband's voice over the phone, blaming my mother. Hey, wait a minute, I told you not to contact Meryl, didn't I? He scolded her. But Jimmy, this is really troubling, my mother protested. You are so annoying. Just hang up the phone quickly. You're making things more complicated, he barked. Oh, wait, Jimmy, let me have the phone back, my mother pleaded. After that, the call ended, leaving only a beeping sound. What was that about? This was definitely not a normal situation. I spoke to my boss and rushed home. When I arrived, I was speechless. Whoa, what's going on here? I asked, seeing the moving truck parked in front of my house and my husband giving instructions to the movers. I confronted him directly. Hey, whose stuff are they moving? I demanded. Meryl, did you just get back from work? He asked, surprised. Never mind that. Just answer my question. Whose stuff is it? I insisted. It's my parents. They're having a hard time and are struggling to make ends meet. That's why I invited them over, he explained. Without even discussing it with me? It's my mom and I's house too. You can't just make such decisions on your own, I protested, feeling betrayed and angry. My anger began to boil as my husband spoke so casually about this. Wait a minute, neither my mom nor I agree to this. You can't just do whatever you want, I snapped. If I told you beforehand, you would have refused. That's why I didn't say anything. Got a problem with that? My husband retorted. Are you kidding me? The idea that they can just move in with us as if they own the place is ridiculous. Anyway, ask your parents to leave, I demanded. What the hell? We just moved in and you're already kicking them out? You are the lowest of the low, he shot back. I'm at the lowest of the low? Why do I have to take responsibility for your parents' ridiculous behavior? They are the ones acting uncivilized, I countered. Upon reflection, he said something completely ridiculous again. Hey Meryl, when you think about it, my healthy parents are more reliable in the future, so we should take good care of them. What? What does that mean? I asked, incredulous. I mean, we should prioritize my parents over your mother. They're more reliable, he explained. Before we got married, I heard from him that his parents had a gambling addiction. How can such unreliable parents be relied on in the future, who have a dependency? So from now on, we will prioritize my parents. So please ask your mother to leave, I said, repeating his absurd logic. When I saw my mother's sad face, my anger reached its peak. Enough already. What are you even thinking? This is my mother's house after all. He shook his head stubbornly. Listen, this is not only your mother's house, but it's also your house as a daughter and my house as a husband. Don't you understand? Of course I understand. My mother built this house and paid the property tax, I replied. Yet you let your parents live here and now you are asking my mother to leave? How could you have such a stupid idea? I continued. Huh, you calling me stupid? You are the one who doesn't understand the priorities. My parents are worth more than your disabled mother with a short life expectancy, he sneered. What the hell are you talking about? I yelled. How dare you? My mother stopped me before I could lunge at him. Meryl, calm down. Now, Mom, don't stop me, I pleaded. It's all right. Let's leave this place, she said calmly, turning to face my husband and his parents. Jimmy, if your parents are really in trouble, they can stay here. I don't mind, but they have to leave once they find work. That was the deal, right? She continued. My husband put on a forced expression. Yes, that's right. My dad got laid off, so we are struggling to make ends meet. I see. Then they can stay here for a month. In the meantime, please make sure your father finds a new job. Got it? My mother instructed. Thank you, my husband replied, somewhat reluctantly. I couldn't believe my husband's convenient response. If we didn't do something, they would take over our home, I whispered to my mother, feeling reassured by her calm demeanor. It'll be okay, Meryl, trust me. But for now, let's just leave, she said. I wasn't happy with this decision, but my mother was the owner of the house. I had no say in the matter. I decided to follow my mother's lead and remain silent. We immediately rented an apartment and started a new life with my mother again. Hey, Mom, are you sure about this? I think it's a bit too good to be true, I asked, still concerned. It's fine, don't worry. Oh, and don't contact them first. Wait for them to contact us, she replied leisurely while sipping tea. But you don't have to worry that much. I'm thinking about it carefully, she added. Huh? What do you mean? I asked, puzzled. It's nothing, she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. What came out of her mouth was beyond my wildest imagination. I couldn't help but feel a little scared of my own mother. But with this plan from then on, I followed my mother's instructions and waited for their contact. 2 months had passed when we received a sudden call from my husband. Hey, Meryl, something terrible has happened. Oh, it's been a while. What's the matter? You sound so flustered, I responded coolly. It's not just a matter of something. We can't use any of the electricity, water, or gas at home. Please help us, he pleaded. I couldn't help but laugh as I could sense the desperation in his voice. What do you mean, help us? You stopped paying for those utilities, so it's only natural that they are no longer available, I explained. What? You stopped paying? Did you do all of that, Meryl? He asked, shocked. Yes, I did. I paid for all the utilities, including electricity and gas. Is there a problem? I asked rhetorically. Of course there's a problem. Why did you do something so selfish? He accused. Selfish? We waited for a month as promised, and then I stopped everything. That means you're still living in that house, doesn't it? And in the end, my father-in-law and mother-in-law still haven't found any jobs, have they? I questioned. My husband looked uncomfortable. Your parents aren't looking for work. They are going to the casino every day, you know? Oh, did you know that? My mother has been keeping an eye on them. After you go to work, they go to the casino together every day. I said, What? Are you kidding me? I give them awards for their hard work, my husband replied. Well, that allowance disappeared into the casino, all of it. I'm sorry for that. I smirked. Enough about my parents. Just fix the lifeline already. We can't live in this dumb heat, he begged. My mom said not to use the air conditioner. It's a waste of electricity. You only care about yourself. As long as you're okay, it doesn't matter to you, I pointed out. What did you say? How do you say that to your husband? He asked angrily. He refused to admit any wrongdoing and kept turning the tables on me. I was completely fed up with my husband's behavior. Ignoring his screaming over the phone, I bluntly spoke my mind. You stayed with me and my mother for 2 months, and yet you act so high and mighty. Your family was able to live because of my mother during that time. What's with your attitude? What are you thinking about the future? This situation is not going to end well. Shut up. Can you really say that, huh? You're going to keep making us suffer. I'll consider divorce, he declared angrily. Huh? Divorce? I asked. To my inquiry, my husband laughed triumphantly. Yeah, even Meryl wouldn't want to get divorced, right? If you don't want a divorce, then quickly arrange your lifeline so you can live on your own. What are you talking about? I asked, confused. I've already decided to divorce you, I stated firmly. What? He gasped. Of course I haven't fallen so far as to cling to marriage after being put through all this. It will be better to divorce them than to be forced to live like this. The electricity, water, and gas in that house won't be turned back on until you leave. If that's okay with you, feel free to keep living there. Wait a minute. Don't ever contact me again, I declared. I ignored my husband, who was about to say something, and hung up the phone. I decided to wait for his family to live with the lifeline still cut off. Maybe he realized that I wasn't answering his calls because he started sending me messages instead. Enough already. It's so hot I feel like I'm dying. Could you at least connect the water, please? You are the only one I can rely on now, he pleaded in his messages. I ignored all of his messages, and a week passed without the lifeline. Our home was just a box. My husband's family, who had made a lot of noise, finally left our house. We divorced without any issues. My mother and I were able to return to our original home safely, and our peaceful daily life returned. Meanwhile, my in-laws are still struggling to find work and relying on their son's meager income. However, his salary is not what one would call high. Now he lives in a small apartment under his name with his family of 3, barely making ends meet. They never expressed gratitude to others and always complained. That's why they ended up like this. From now on, my mother and I just want to live quietly without anyone bothering us. I can't take it anymore. Please say something to him too, I pleaded with Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked confused. What's gotten into you all of a sudden? It's not all of a sudden, I insisted. I've been asking you many times, haven't I? Tell him clearly. I pleaded with my husband to get his younger brother to move out of our house. You want me to kick out my brother who has nowhere else to go? Nathaniel said, looking torn. You're my wife, and for him, you're his sister-in-law. How can you say something like that? He continued. My mother-in-law chimed in. That's right, you're really heartless. Not only my husband, but even my mother-in-law condemned me as if I were the one at fault. This is a story about the unbelievable family I got involved in. My name is Aileen. I got married to my current husband, Nathaniel, when I was 29 years old. We met through a matchmaking arrangement. During my school days, I was fully dedicated to karate, which I had been practicing since childhood, and romance took a back seat. I spent my days consumed by club activities, striving to balance them with my studies. Of course, that doesn't mean I had no desire to get married once I became a working adult. However, as someone who had never seriously pursued a romantic relationship before, I didn't quite understand how to build connections with men. Even after becoming a working adult, I couldn't find a boyfriend. Seeing me in that situation, my company's boss said, I know someone who might be a good match for you, and introduced me to my current husband. My first impression of Nathaniel was that he was an incredibly kind person. He was a military man and gave a peaceful, gentle vibe that exuded pacifism. Since he took a liking to me and I had always wanted to get married by the time I turned 30, I quickly accepted his invitation to start dating. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and we soon fell deeply in love with each other. I particularly liked his sincere and gentle nature, and I thought that I could build a life together with him. After a while he proposed to me, and I immediately accepted. We were happily married without any issues. When Nathaniel and I decided to get married, my wealthy parents, who owned several houses as vacation homes, gave me one of those houses as a gift. "You can choose any house you like," they said. I chose a house that was just the right size, not too big or too small. It was an ordinary house, slightly larger than the average single-family home. It had enough rooms in case we had children in the future and also had a backyard. The location was convenient, with good transportation access and proximity to the train station, and there were no inconveniences like supermarkets nearby. So I chose that place. Usually Nathaniel didn't show his emotions openly, but he said something at that moment. "Wow, this is amazing. Are you sure it's okay for us to receive such a splendid house?" I remember him murmuring with a hint of apology. Our happy life was about to begin. I believed in that without a doubt. After the wedding ceremony went smoothly, everything was going well for us. However, a few months later, my father-in-law, who had a pre-existing illness, passed away. My husband had one younger brother, but he worked and lived in a factory in another prefecture, so we rarely had the chance to meet. I met him for the first time at the wedding ceremony. The second time we met was at my father-in-law's funeral. After my father-in-law's passing, my mother-in-law was left alone at her parents' house, and my husband started contacting her frequently. Simultaneously, my mother-in-law started visiting our house frequently. Certainly, my husband had the responsibility of being the eldest son, and he may have felt a sense of obligation. I understood the concern for my mother-in-law who was now alone, but at the time I was busy with work, and our home was the only place where I could find solace. So I was a little worried about my mother-in-law constantly being present in our home, as if it were a given. After a few months of such daily life, one day my husband informed me, "Hey, Aileen, I'm thinking of living together with my mom." Huh? I was puzzled by my husband's sudden statement. Why all of a sudden? She's already coming to our house so frequently. Well, it must be hard for her to come all the way here every time, right? So I think it would be better if we lived together, he said with sparkling eyes as if he had come up with a brilliant idea. Wait a minute. It's troubling to be suddenly told something like this. We have our own lives too, you know, I expressed my concerns. It's not like this house is too big for just the two of us. We have extra rooms. I think it will be helpful for my mom to live with us, he said, not seeming willing to consider my opinion. After that, I didn't react much, but my husband kept pushing the idea. If anything happened, I'm worried about leaving my mom alone, he said. Honestly, I wasn't very enthusiastic about it since our married life had just begun. It was said that my mother-in-law was worried, so I couldn't strongly argue back. While I was indecisive without a clear answer, my mother-in-law sold her parents' house, and I was forced into a situation where I had to accept my mother-in-law. At first, I blamed my husband for proceeding without consulting me. But, the family house is gone now. Mom has nowhere else to go. It can't be helped, he said, and somehow, I lost the will to argue back. Life after that was tough for me personally. I didn't experience outright harassment like what is called yomi bullying in society, but I disliked being constantly told, "You are the daughter-in-law, you know," having that kind of old-fashioned thinking. She would say, "Since you married my son and became part of the family, you should serve your husband's family." Whenever I prioritized something current, she would repeatedly tell me, "You are the daughter-in-law, so please have a little more awareness." Personally, ever since my mother-in-law started coming to our house, staying at home became a burden, and I started working overtime more often, while skillfully dodging my mother-in-law's sarcastic remarks every day. We were still leading a relatively ordinary life until that incident happened. After a while, my brother-in-law, who had been living and working at the factory, said that he would quit his job at the end of the fiscal year and return to his parents' house. My husband, my mother-in-law, and I were all surprised by this sudden announcement. But there was something more important that we had to consider: where he would come back to. Our old family home had already been sold and was no longer in a livable state as we pleased. When my brother-in-law, who had been determined to return to his parents' house, found out that my husband and my mother-in-law had sold the house without consulting him, he blamed them. I never heard anything about selling the family home. Who made that decision without consulting me? My brother-in-law demanded angrily. I'm sorry, Nathaniel tried to pacify him. I was worried about Mom living alone in that house, and I thought you were going to continue living and working over there. Huh? I don't know anything about that. You made that decision without asking anyone. Take responsibility, you damn older brother, my brother-in-law shouted at my husband. Although my husband was supposed to be the older brother, he just trembled in response to my brother-in-law's words. He couldn't say anything back and simply turned pale, looking down. In the first place, regarding the family home, my late father-in-law had said, "If something happens to me, entrust everything about the house to your wife." Does my brother-in-law, who spontaneously left the family home, worked in another state, and didn't even send money home, have the right to blame my mother-in-law and the others? I had such thoughts, but in the end, we couldn't reach a resolution, and it was decided that he would live with us until he found his next job. I was really against it, so I said to my husband, "I don't want to live with your brother. Your mother and I have shouldered the living expenses now that we live together." My husband replied, "As soon as he finds a job, we'll make him leave. Please bear with it until then." I couldn't reject it on my own and kick him out, so reluctantly my brother-in-law ended up living with us. At this point, my mental state was already greatly affected, but the real difficulties came later. First of all, even though it was a condition that my brother-in-law would find a job, even after a month, he hadn't made any effort to search for one. He didn't look at job listings, didn't go for interviews, and just spent his days hiding in the living room. There were days when he stayed locked in his room, playing music at high volume, and days when he occupied the living room TV for hours on his own. I was accumulating stress day by day. To make matters worse, as soon as I came home from work, he treated me like a housekeeper, and it was unbearable. I broke down and complained to my husband, "It's about your brother. He treats me like a housekeeper." My husband said with a laugh, "He looks up to you and treats you like an older sister, Aileen." "Treats me like an older sister? Where? He's always bossing me around. This is not how a housekeeper should be treated. I'm not a servant in this house." As I became emotional, my husband said, "It's fine, isn't it? You is my wife after all." My anger reached its peak and I couldn't help but shout, "I'm your wife. I'm not your brother's wife." He finally said to me, "Come on, enough already. Sure, you is not his wife, but my brother is still your brother-in-law. Don't cause unnecessary conflict and let's get along." Honestly, I was disappointed with my husband's statement. It seemed like he believed that everything would be fine if I just endured it. I thought there was no point in saying anything more to my husband, so I stopped complaining about my brother-in-law and mother-in-law to him. Instead, from time to time, I would call my parents and vent my frustrations. My parents would always say, "If something happens, you can come back home anytime." So I managed to endure living in this house. However, one day my brother-in-law caused trouble again. When I finished work and came home, there was a fire truck parked in front of the house. Curious about what had happened, I saw several firefighters coming out of the front door, while my husband and mother-in-law thanked them. After watching the fire truck leave, I confronted my husband. "What's going on? Why did a fire truck come to our house?" My husband and mother-in-law exchanged glances and hesitantly explained, "Well, it's because your brother-in-law accidentally caused the fire with a cigarette butt." Surprised and furious, I raised my voice. As I listened to the details, it turned out that a minor fire had started from a cigarette butt. My panicked mother-in-law had contacted my husband and the fire department. Why didn't they inform me? It was just a coincidence that I encountered the firefighters when I arrived home, but were they planning to keep it a secret if I had come back without knowing? When I asked them that, both of them fell silent. Frustrated with their silence, I hurriedly went to my brother-in-law's room and entered without knocking. "Hey, what the hell? Knock before entering!" my brother-in-law shouted. Ignoring my brother-in-law, who was angry with me, I looked around the room. Immediately I noticed scorch marks on the floor right next to the laid-out futon. Ever since my brother-in-law came, the house had been smelling like smoke, and even that was stressful for me. And now, to top it all off, there were scorch marks on my beloved house. I had reached my limit. Even though my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were right in front of me, I couldn't take it anymore. "Please say something to him too," I pleaded with my husband. My husband listlessly said, "What was that sudden outburst?" "It's not sudden. Haven't I been asking you many times until now? Tell him clearly too that he needs to leave." I implored my husband, asking him to have my brother-in-law move out. In response, my husband let out a deep sigh and reluctantly said, "You want me to kick out my brother who has nowhere else to go? You're my wife, and for him, you're his sister-in-law. How can you even say something like that?" "That's right. You're truly despicable as a person," mother-in-law started talking. Not only my husband but even my mother-in-law treated me as if I was to blame for the fire. Why am I the one being blamed? This is a precious house that my father passed down to me. In the first place, not to mention my husband, but my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, who started living here without any prior arrangement, have no right to complain. Feeling that I couldn't back down this time, I clearly told my brother-in-law, "Just leave." "You want to kick out your own brother-in-law? If you can't take it, then go on your own," my husband said, storming out of the room. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law was quietly watching the situation unfold. Feeling frustrated, I returned to my room. The next day, when I came home from work, the key wouldn't fit in the front door lock. No matter how many times I tried, it wouldn't go in, and there was no response when I pressed the intercom. Then, I received a notification on my phone, a message from my husband. "I've had the locks changed. Once you've cooled down, I'll let you back in the house." "Don't mess with me. If you're serious about that, then I'll leave too," I replied. Thinking that way, I went back to my parents' house and explained the situation to them. After hearing me out, my parents' faces gradually grew stern, and my father said, "Leave it to me, Aileen." Saying that, he asked a lawyer he knew for help. Things progressed rapidly. A divorce petition was filed, and a formal notice demanding eviction from the house was sent. On a later date, a meeting was arranged at my house with the presence of a lawyer. As soon as the discussion began, my husband said, "Divorce over something like this is ridiculous." He refused to get a divorce, but when I said I agreed to the divorce and I didn't mind going to court, he quickly gave up. Perhaps overwhelmed by the word court, my husband suddenly became quiet. However, when the topic of leaving the house came up, he raised his voice and resisted again. "This house is our home as a married couple. Even as a husband, I have the right to own it," he stated. With an air of superiority, he looked down on me. Then the lawyer took out a certificate of registered matters and said, "You have no rights to this house whatsoever." That's right. This house was a gift from my father before marriage, given to me as an inheritance. For my husband, it couldn't be considered marital property. I could see the faces of my husband and the other two men turning paler and paler. Perhaps they had thought that they wouldn't actually be forced to leave. Gradually, their heads began to hang low. "Can we reconsider the divorce?" My husband suddenly brought up such a convenient suggestion. "What will you do?" the lawyer asked. In response, I said clearly, "Of course I will proceed with the divorce. My feelings haven't changed." As a result, the three men hung their heads, and perhaps realizing there was no other choice, my husband agreed to the divorce without resistance. The divorce was finalized without any issues, and the three of them moved out of the house. It seems they moved to a rundown apartment. Of course, they couldn't enjoy the freedom they desired, and both my mother-in-law and younger brother-in-law accumulated stress. Regarding my brother-in-law, it appears he tried to vent his frustration outside and ended up causing an assault incident. Well, it's no longer my concern. I successfully regained the house and repaired the room my brother-in-law used to live in. The burn marks on the floor that bothered me disappeared, and my mood brightened. Now, my parents come to stay over on weekends, and I'm enjoying reasonably pleasant days. I went out for a meal with the lawyer who helped me with this matter as a way to express my gratitude, and we continue to meet regularly. Perhaps one day I'll have the chance to have a married life again. With such thoughts in mind, I'm living happily every day.